The alien scum would soon learn to never anger humanity, as they screamed and bled out on the cold metal floor, regretting the grave mistake of underestimating mankind. Gary Dixon, a human maintenance engineer, wiped sweat from his brow. The only human on Zelos Prime, a Qatarian space station, he was tasked with fixing the malfunctioning atmospherics. The insectoid Qatarians towered over him at 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and 2 legs. But size didn't matter when you had brains. As Gary worked, he overheard Qatarian workers Antares and Ziktar. "Clumsy, stupid humans, an inferior species," spat Antares. "One of their freighters hit our warship. 50 Qatarian warriors, dead." "We only keep humans around for cheap labor," Ziktar agreed. "They have no other use." Rage flashed through Gary, hearing the insults. His hand slipped and a heavy wrench clattered to the floor. The Qatarians turned. "Apologize for eavesdropping, puny human." Antares loomed over Gary. Gary stared up at the hulking alien. Every human on Zelos Prime was relying on him to keep the oxygen flowing. The Qatarians provided life support and could kill the humans at any moment by shutting it off. He had to be smart. But Gary couldn't contain his fury. He challenged Antares. "You want to fight about it, Bugface? Let's go." Antares roared and smashed a fist into Gary, launching him across the room. Gary crashed to the floor, bones rattling. This was a terrible idea. Groaning, he pushed himself up. But Gary knew Qatarian weak points. He launched at Antares, striking the alien's neck and joints. If he could win this fight, maybe he could win his people leverage. Gary panted, wiping blood from his lip as he staggered away from Antares' unconscious form. He winced as medics rushed past him to tend to his insectoid foe. He had won, but at what cost? The fight replayed in Gary's mind as he limped towards his quarters, expecting a furious mob of Qatarians to descend upon him at any moment. As Gary reached his doorway, a voice barked from his communicator. "Gary Dixon, you are summoned to Commander Zorgax's office immediately." Gary gulped. This was it. He was done for. Exiled to drift in space if he was lucky. Moments later, Gary stepped into Zorgax's office, head lowered, ready to face judgment. The towering red Qatarian regarded Gary from behind his desk. "I suppose you're here to kick me off the station," Gary said. "I understand." "On the contrary," Zorgax replied. "Antares is a known troublemaker. He has a history of bullying and aggression towards other species. You stood up to him when no one else would." Gary blinked in surprise. What?" "I'm impressed by your courage and skill, Gary. I'd like to offer you a promotion to Chief Maintenance Engineer." "Chief Engineer? I don't know." "You'll have the full support of station security," Zorgax assured him. "No more incidents like today." Gary hesitated, then nodded. "All right, I'll do it." In his new role, Gary began interacting with more Qatarians, learning about their culture and society. He soon discovered the Qatarians' rigid caste system, based on exoskeleton color. Blue and green Qatarians, the lower castes, faced constant discrimination and mistreatment from the higher red and gold castes. Appalled by this injustice, Gary started secretly helping the lower caste Qatarians. He used his position to get them better resources and opportunities. Before long, he had a loyal following among the blue and green Qatarians. They saw him as their champion. But Gary's activities didn't go unnoticed. Councillor Xandar, a high-caste gold Qatarian and Antares' father, watched Gary's every move. To Xandar, this human was a threat to Qatarian power and tradition. Xandar gathered his allies, determined to put a stop to Gary's meddling, one way or another. The high-caste gold Qatarian narrowed his eyes at a holoscreen, displaying security footage of Gary aiding a group of blue Qatarian workers. Councillor Xandar slammed a fist onto his desk. "This human has gone too far. It's time we put an end to his interference," Xandar growled. He pressed a button on his communicator. "Captain Zorgax, I have a task for you." Hours later, an alarm blared through the station. Gary raced to the power core, his heart pounding. A crowd of Qatarians had already gathered, murmuring anxiously. Captain Zorax pushed through the throng, his red exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh lights. "What's going on?" Gary asked. Zorax held up a charred piece of equipment, sabotage, and we found this near the core. He revealed a human-sized wrench covered in burn marks. "It seems you've been busy, Chief Engineer." Gary's eyes widened. "That's not mine. I've been framed." Two burly security officers seized Gary's arms. He struggled against their grip as they dragged him away. In a dimly lit room, Gary stood before a row of high-caste Katarians, their expressions stern. Councillor Xandar presided over the tribunal. "Gary Dixon, you stand accused of attempting to sabotage Zelos Prime's power core. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, I'm being set up," Gary shouted. Xandar silenced him with a wave of his hand. "The evidence is clear. This tribunal finds you guilty. You are hereby sentenced to life imprisonment on Karzak." Gary slumped in defeat as the guards led him away. The prison transport shuttle shuddered as it approached Karzak. Gary, shackled and dejected, barely noticed the turbulence. Suddenly, an explosion rocked the shuttle. Alarms screeched, and the lights flickered. The door burst open, and a group of heavily armed humans stormed in. They made short work of the Katarian guards. One of the humans, a woman with a colonel's insignia, approached Gary. "Gary Dixon? I'm Colonel Sarah Hawkins. We're here to get you out." Minutes later, Gary found himself aboard a sleek human stealth ship. Colonel Hawkins led him to the bridge. "I don't understand. Why did you rescue me?" Gary asked. "We've been monitoring Zelos Prime. We know you're innocent. Councillor Xandar framed you," Hawkins explained. "But that's not all. We've uncovered evidence that the Ktarians are planning to invade Earth. They're using the incident with our freighter as an excuse for war." Gary's mind reeled. "What can we do?" Hawkins placed a hand on his shoulder. "We're going to stop them, and you're going to help us. With your knowledge of the Katarians and the station, you're our best asset." She gestured to a table laden with advanced human weapons and a gleaming powered exoskeleton. "It's time to even the odds. Welcome to the team." Equipped with his powered exoskeleton and an array of advanced human weaponry, Gary infiltrated the heavily guarded Katarian military base on Zelos III. He crept through dimly lit corridors, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of detection. With a few quick taps on his wrist computer, Gary hacked into the base's security system, looping the camera feeds to cover his intrusion. He made his way to the central command center, where he accessed the Katarians' top-secret files. Gary's eyes widened as he scanned the data. Schematics for massive warships, each capable of obliterating entire human colonies. Plans for an army of genetically engineered Katarian supersoldiers bred for conquest. The scale of the Tarians' invasion plans was staggering. Gary quickly downloaded the files and transmitted them to Colonel Hawkins. Just as the upload completed, alarms blared throughout the base. "Intruder alert! Human infiltrator detected in Sector 7, a robotic voice announced. Gary cursed under his breath and sprinted for the exit. He rounded a corner and came face to face with a squad of heavily armed Katarian soldiers. "Halt! Surrender now!" one of the soldiers ordered, leveling his plasma rifle at Gary. In response, Gary launched himself at the Ktarians, his exoskeleton-enhanced strength and speed catching them off guard. He disarmed the first soldier with a swift kick, sending the plasma rifle clattering across the floor. Ducking under a flurry of blows from the second Katarian, Gary delivered a series of rapid punches to the alien's midsection, his powered fists cracking the soldier's chitinous armor. The Katarian crumpled to the ground, gasping for breath. More soldiers poured into the corridor, firing a hail of plasma bolts at Gary. He dove for cover, his exoskeleton absorbing the few shots that managed to hit him. Grabbing the fallen plasma rifle, Gary returned fire, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to pick off the Katarians with precise shots. Just as Gary began to turn the tide of the battle, a familiar figure strode onto the scene. Antares, now clad in the ornate armor of a Katarian commander, fixed Gary with a venomous glare. You've meddled in our affairs for the last time, human, Antares spat. I'll enjoy watching you die. The two rivals clashed in a furious melee, trading blows that would have shattered ordinary bones. Antares' forearms moved in a blur, his claws leaving deep gouges in Gary's exoskeleton. But Gary's human ingenuity and adaptability proved a match for the Qatarian's raw strength. Spotting a weakness in Antares' defenses, Gary feinted left, then delivered a devastating uppercut to the Qatarian's jaw. Antares reeled back, his compound eyes widening in shock. Pressing his advantage, Gary launched a relentless assault, pummeling Antares with a series of lightning-fast strikes. The Qatarian commander staggered, then toppled to the ground, unconscious. Gary stood over his fallen foe, chest heaving with exertion. He reached for his sidearm, prepared to end Antares once and for all, but as his finger tightened on the trigger, Gary hesitated. No, he wouldn't stoop to the Qatarian's level. Antares could still be useful alive as a bargaining chip in negotiations with the Qatarian government. Gary holstered his weapon and activated his comlink. Colonel Hawkins, I've got the data and I've subdued Antares, requesting immediate extraction. Copy that, Gary, Hawkins replied. We're inbound ETA 2 minutes. Gary secured the unconscious Antares and made his way to the extraction point, fighting off waves of Qatarian reinforcements along the way. As the human stealth ship descended from the skies, Gary leaped aboard, Antares slung over his shoulder. With the evidence of the Qatarians' invasion plans secured and Antares in custody, Gary and Colonel Hawkins set course for Zelos Prime. It was time to confront Councillor Xandar and put an end to his schemes once and for all. The human stealth ship docked at Zelos Prime, and Gary and Colonel Hawkins marched into the Qatarian High Council chamber, flanked by a squad of human marines. The councillors chittered and hissed in outrage at the intrusion. "What is the meaning of this?" Councillor Xandar demanded, rising from his seat. Colonel Hawkins stepped forward, her expression stern. "Councillor Xandar, we have evidence of your government's plans to invade human space and enslave our people." She activated a holoprojector, displaying the schematics and plans Gary had stolen from the Qatarian base. The councillors fell silent, their compound eyes widening in shock. "Not only that," Gary added, "but we also have proof of the systemic oppression and mistreatment of the lower castes within Qatarian society." He gestured to the lower caste Qatarians in the room, many of whom bore signs of physical abuse and malnutrition. "This ends now. The Qatarian government must implement immediate reforms to address these injustices and guarantee equal rights for all castes." Councillor Xandar's mandibles twitched in rage. "You dare lecture us, human? You who have no understanding of our ways?" He lunged for a hidden panel on the wall, intent on triggering the chamber's security systems. But before he could reach it, Captain Zorak stepped forward and grabbed Xandar's arm. "No, Councillor," Zorak said firmly. "They're right, I've seen the evidence. We cannot continue on this path." Zorak turned to face his fellow councillors. "For too long we have allowed our society to be ruled by cruelty and injustice. It is time for change." One by one, the other councillors nodded in agreement. Even the high-caste Qatarians could no longer deny the truth of Gary and Colonel Hawkins' words. Realizing that his schemes had been exposed, Councillor Xandar made a desperate attempt to flee. He shoved past Captain Zorak and sprinted for the exit. But he didn't get far before a squad of blue and green Tarian soldiers, loyal to Gary and the cause of reform, apprehended him. With Councillor Xandar in custody and the evidence of the Qatarians' misdeeds laid bare, the Qatarian High Council had no choice but to enter into negotiations with the human government. Tense discussions ensued as diplomats from both sides worked to hammer out the details of a peace treaty and trade agreements. As a key figure in exposing the Qatarians' plans and advocating for the rights of the lower castes, Gary found himself thrust into a new role, human ambassador to the Qatarian Empire. His task was to oversee the implementation of much-needed reforms and ensure fair treatment for all Qatarians, regardless of their exoskeleton color. Gary threw himself into his work, meeting with Qatarian leaders and representatives from the various castes. He listened to their concerns, mediated disputes, and worked tirelessly to bridge the gap between the humans and Qatarians. But not everyone was happy with the changes sweeping through Qatarian society. A faction of high-caste Qatarians, led by Antari's brother Zektar, seethed with resentment. They saw Gary's reforms as a threat to their power and way of life. Late one night, as Gary worked in his office at the human embassy, alarms suddenly blared. Explosions rocked the building, and the sound of plasma fire filled the air. Gary rushed to the door, only to be met by a group of armed Qatarians, their exoskeletons adorned with the colors of Zektar's faction. Before Gary could react, a stun blast hit him square in the chest. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. He awoke to find himself shackled to a chair in a dark room, his head pounding. A harsh light flared to life, and Zektar's menacing figure loomed over him. "You thought you could change our ways, human?" Zektar sneered. "You thought you could make us weak like you know. The Qatarian Empire will rise again, stronger than ever, and you will be the example of what happens to those who defy us." Zektar's claws dug into Gary's flesh as he began to torture the human ambassador. Gary gritted his teeth, refusing to give Zektar the satisfaction of hearing him scream. But Zektar had other plans. He broadcast the footage of Gary's torture across the Qatarian Empire, hoping to incite a rebellion against the new order. "See how the mighty human falls," Zektar crowed. "See how we will crush all who oppose us." As Gary's vision began to fade, he heard a commotion outside the room. Shouts, gunfire, the hiss of plasma weapons. The door burst open, and Colonel Hawkins charged in, her team of human special forces and loyal Tarian soldiers at her back. A fierce battle erupted, plasma bolts crisscrossing the room. Colonel Hawkins rushed to Gary's side, frantically working to free him from his bonds, but as she helped him to his feet, a searing blast of plasma struck her in the back. She fell, her body shielding Gary from the brunt of the blast. Rage and grief surged through Gary as he cradled Colonel Hawkins's lifeless form. With a roar of fury, he seized a plasma rifle and charged into the fray, his exoskeleton-enhanced strength and speed allowing him to cut through Zektar's forces like a hot knife through butter. He fought his way to Zektar, the rebel leader's eyes widening in fear as Gary bore down on him. The two clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand battle, trading blows that would have shattered ordinary bones. But even as Gary gained the upper hand, he hesitated. Zektar was beaten at his mercy. Gary could end it here with a single shot, but all around him he could see the terrified faces of Qatarian civilians, caught in the crossfire of Zektar's mad scheme. With a heavy heart, Gary made his choice. He fired, and Zektar fell, his life snuffed out in an instant. The battle was won, but at a terrible cost. In the years that followed, Gary threw himself into his work as ambassador, striving to heal the wounds left by Zektar's rebellion. He worked tirelessly to promote understanding between humans and Qatarians, to break down the barriers of prejudice and mistrust. But even as he made progress, Gary knew that the scars of the past would never truly fade. The memory of Colonel Hawkins' sacrifice, of the lives lost on both sides, would stay with him forever. As Gary looked out over the gleaming spires of the Qatarian capital, now a hub of interspecies cooperation and trade, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness. For all the progress they had made, he knew that the journey towards true peace and acceptance was far from over. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.